Welcome to my kitchen. We're studying literature, and so obviously I thought I would invite you here to talk about eggs. I don't mean chicken eggs, I mean Easter eggs. That probably makes no sense whatsoever right now, but I hope it will in a few minutes. When we talk about literature, we often talk about the form and the content. And the content basically is all the stuff that happens inside a piece. It might be the emotions of a poem, it might be how the characters relate in a short story, it might be character development, it might be the sudden plot turns or things like that. Those are the contents, what happens inside the piece. And then there's the form, which is kind of like the shape that the story or the poem takes, or the techniques that are used in that piece. If we want to talk about eggs, if we want to talk about chicken eggs, if this is our content, there are lots of different ways to make something out of this, right? You can scramble it, you can hard boil it, you can eat it over easy, you can use the yolks and the custard and make something like a creme brulee, you can beat the egg whites and make a souffle. So the content is the egg itself, but then when you apply all these different techniques, the actual content or your experience with the content changes, right? Now a lot of people, especially students that I encounter when they're first really engaging with literature for the first time, they tend to think that literature is kind of like the plastic Easter eggs, right? Where you have the form on the outside, the pink Easter egg, and the content on the inside. And it's really easy to just take them apart, dump the content out, and then they're two separate things, right? We have form, totally unrelated to content. But I don't really think that's the case. I think form and content, the relationship, is a little bit more like the Cadbury egg, and I'll get back to that in a little bit. First, I want to, maybe this will make more sense if we talk specifics. So we've been reading The Things They Carried and The Lottery, my egg's running away from me, by Shirley Jackson and Tim O'Brien. Okay, so if we talk about The Lottery, hopefully you've read the stories by now, I'm not giving anything away. In The Lottery, we know that the lottery is taking place this day in June. We're not quite sure what the lottery is. The further and further we get into the story, we get suspicious, right? Because people don't maybe want to win the lottery, they're thinking about not holding the lottery anymore, and then at the very end we have the plot turn, right? Where we figure out that the lottery is not where you win $1 million, or you win a new car, or you even win a gift basket from Bed Bath & Beyond. No, you get stoned to death, we assume, right? That's a really jarring experience, right? And I think that that story does not work quite the same way if it's told in any other way. Now if we take a look at The Things They Carried, that plot works a little bit differently. In The Lottery, things are told chronologically, right? We're always moving forward at a continuous pace. We're never flashing back. We're never really looking forward. That's not what happens in The Things They Carried. The main event in The Lottery is the lottery itself, and that's withheld until the very end. One of the main events, if not the main event of The Things They Carried, is when Lavender dies. But we're told before he actually dies that he's going to die. And we're not just told once, we're told, I think, I've counted, either 6 or 7 times before the actual scene takes place, right? And that's very different than what happens in the lottery. Think about what happens if in the lottery we find out right away that the lottery is the thing that we find out it is, okay? That changes our experience of the story. Likewise, I don't think that The Things They Carried would be as powerful if we withhold Ted Lavender's death until the very end. This may seem silly, but I think that, killing Ted Lavender over and over again, and by that I mean mentioning his death over and over again, is a way of enacting for the reader the way the soldiers feel about death when they're in the war, right? Because they have to experience people dying over and over and over again. You've probably noticed by some of the ways that they talk about death, they talk about Ted Lavender's death, that it seems a little bit callous and unfeeling. That's hard to portray in words to someone who's reading. I've never been in a war, so I have no idea what that feels like. You guys are probably, most of you are probably in a similar position. But what Tim O'Brien does when he mentions Ted Lavender's death over and over and over again, in a way he's killing him over and over and over again. So that by the time we get to Ted Lavender's death, the actual scene where it happens, I don't know about you, but I really don't care all that much. I'm not invested emotionally anymore. I might be curious intellectually, like, okay, how does he really die? What are the circumstances around it? But I don't have that feeling connection anymore, the way that I might have at the beginning of the story. And I think that's meant to mimic the way that the soldiers feel when they're in the war, because they don't have the luxury of really feeling a lot of emotion when their colleagues around them are dying, right? Because if you had to grieve for every one of your brothers that you're fighting with the way you grieve with when your grandmother or something dies, you would just be emotionally broken down and you wouldn't be able to make it. So they have to build up these walls. And so I think when Tim O'Brien kills Ted Lavender over and over again, it's a way of desensitizing the reader to his death, just like the soldiers are desensitized to all the death that they see around them. But getting back to form and content, I don't think that, if we were to say, if our pink egg is the lottery and our yellow egg is the things they carried, I don't think we can just dump out the content and swap it into the other form and keep a story that makes sense in the same way, right? The story of the lottery would basically be ruined if we find out at the very beginning what the lottery is, right? Everything, what's so great about the lottery is all the little clues that you get that make you suspicious, all the stones that are being gathered, why they're thinking about not having the lottery. If you find out at the beginning, if you alter the form, the content just isn't as powerful. And I think the same thing applies to the things they carried. If we structure the things they carried in the way that things were structured in the lottery, then maybe we feel a little bit more emotionally when Ted Lavender actually dies. But I don't think that's what Tim O'Brien really wants. I think he wants us to be less emotionally invested in Ted Lavender when he dies, right? Because that's the situation that the soldiers are in. Now, if we come back to the Cadbury egg, I don't think that literature, whether it's short stories or poems, are like the plastic Easter eggs, right? Where you can pop the top and eat the candy that's inside. I think it's more like the Cadbury egg, which is frankly the best Easter candy around, if you ask me, especially the cream kind. I think if we open one of these guys up, you'll find out that it's not as easy to scrape out all of the content out of the form, right? You have the chocolate egg and then you have the tasty cream on the inside. You can scrape and scrape, but you're never going to get everything. And if you get everything, you're also probably taking some of the chocolate with you, okay? Because they're sort of meshed together. There's not one thing bouncing around inside, unconnected. The content isn't unconnected to the form. In fact, they're very intimately connected, and you can't, I just broke it, perfect metaphor, right? You can't separate the one from the other without totally changing the experience of the story. So when we talk about form and content, we're not just trying to be, like highly academic and making ourselves sound smart. It's because the actual shape that these pieces take affect the way that we experience the content that's inside them. So, thanks for joining me in the kitchen. I've got some real work to do, washing dishes and so forth. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this kind of makes sense. I'm going to eat my Cadbury egg, and I'll see you next time.